Hi there and welcome to the channel, and in this video I'll be talking about three classic sci-fi novels by H.G. Wells, and they are these: The Time Machine, The Invisible Man and The War of the Worlds. But before coming on to those, two brief items of news. Firstly, the channel has passed the milestone of 900 subscribers, so the race is on to reach that wonderful round number of 1,000, and you can help by subscribing, liking, sharing and recommending what I'm doing here. That would be much appreciated. And secondly, I have something to show you. Now, for anyone unfamiliar with the ins and outs of Chinese New Year, these are the famous Hongbaos, red envelopes, which people exchange at this time of year. And what's inside is the most practical thing of all: money. And I'm going to spend mine on some new books. Just thought I would share that with you. Okay, we're ready now to turn our attention to the first of these novels, The Time Machine. Published in 1895, The Time Machine was Wells' first novel, and it was an instant success. It opens in an entirely conventional manner in a drawing room where, over champagne, one gentleman recounts a remarkable tale to an audience made up of his fellow gentlemen who are of a rather sceptical persuasion. And in this respect, you'll find just the same formula in many of the short stories of Guy de Maupassant. However, Wells' novel differs in three significant respects. Firstly, Wells pokes fun at this conventional formula by assigning placeholder names to the time traveller's auditors. So we have the provincial mayor, the medical man, the psychologist, the editor, and the journalist. Secondly, there is the use of a miraculous piece of technology in this story, the time machine. And lastly, I think it's noteworthy that in his first novel, Wells sets it up in this way, with a time traveller trying to persuade a skeptical audience of the truth of their account. You could very much see the time traveller as Wells himself, and the substance of his tale is designed to persuade the reader of the viability of this new genre. I'm not about to divulge the substance of the time traveller's tale. It forms the main action of the novel after all. For those who know this work, it would be superfluous, and for those wishing to read it for the first time, it would constitute a spoiler. What I will say is that for the most part, The Time Machine is very roughly written. However, when the time traveller is making his escape back to the present day, he accidentally hurtles forward in time and presents this vision of the end of the earth. And here we get some really strong writing. And so I wish to quote a passage from this section. I cannot convey the sense of abominable desolation that hung over the world. The red eastern sky, the northward blackness, the salt Dead Sea, the stony beach crawling with these foul, slow-stirring monsters, the uniform, poisonous-looking green of the lichenous plants, the thin air that hurts one's lungs, all contributed to an appalling effect. I moved on 100 years, and there was the same red sun, a little larger, a little duller, the same dying sea, the same chill air, and the same crowd of earthly crustacea creeping in and out among the green weed and the red rocks. And in the westward sky I saw a curved pale line, like a vast new moon. I really enjoyed this vision of the end of the world, this first-person account with its dry scientific tone, shorn of the sentimentality that permeates the main action of the novel, and for which we have to hold Weena responsible. This novel would be much better without Weena. After this vision of the end of the world, the gentlemen assembled in the Edwardian drawing room grumble and make their way home, shaking their heads, but I think the reader is left in no doubt. The possibilities that have been opened up by this new genre are boundless. This is a new kind of fiction for a new age. So I greatly enjoyed The Time Traveller. It has its flaws, but on the positive side, it's very short, less than 100 pages, and you can digest it in just a few hours. Okay, let's move on to the second novel, The Invisible Man. Published in 1897, The Invisible Man needs little by way of summary. But what I think the first-time reader may be surprised by is how unstable the mixture of elements is in this novel. There is comedy of the slapstick and farcical kind, then there's some measure of suspense, and there's also quite a lot of explicit violence. It's a rather unhappy, hodgepodge in truth, but the part I wish to read from is the most strongly imagined, and that is when the Invisible Man is recounting his own story. I shall never forget that dawn and the strange horror of seeing that my hands had become as clouded glass, and watching them grow clearer and thinner as the day went by, until at last I could see the sickly disorder of my room through them, though I closed my transparent eyelids. My limbs became glassy, the bones and arteries faded, vanished, and the little white nerves went last. I gritted my teeth and stayed there to the end. At last only the dead tips of the fingernails remained, pallid and white, and the brown stain of some acid upon my fingers. I struggled up. At first I was as incapable as a swathed infant, stepping with limbs I could not see. I was weak and very hungry. I went and stared at nothing in my shaving glass, at nothing save where an attenuated pigment still remained behind the retina of my eyes, fainter than mist. I had to hang on to the table and press my forehead to the glass. It was only by a frantic effort of will that I dragged myself back to the apparatus and completed the process. What a richly imaginative passage, and what stands out here is the phrase transparent eyelids. What a powerful image. And this is only the beginning of a quite wonderful sequence where we have a first-person account of the trials and tribulations of being an invisible man, firstly on the streets of London, and then as the invisible man makes his way to the countryside. And what this does is fill in the time until we reach the point where the novel itself began. And this is absolutely the strongest section of what is a very disjointed novel. The first section is rather comic. The second, this account of being invisible, is richly imagined. And the third is just inexplicably violent. But what I do really appreciate is that despite the rather thin quality of Wells's novel, he doesn't try to bulk it up by relying upon conventions drawn from Gothic fiction. It would be really easy to turn this into a kind of Frankenstein 2.0. He resists because he's trying to pioneer a new genre which is shorn of that kind of medievalism, which is more scientific, which is more rational. And I do think that is a noble enterprise. However, one might read the inexplicable violence of the Invisible Man as well as his own frustration at not quite knowing how to best exploit his magnificent creation. So, The Invisible Man, superior to The Time Traveller. I heartily recommend it. And now let's move on to our final novel, The War of the Worlds. Also published in 1897, The War of the Worlds, rather like The Invisible Man, needs little by way of a summary. This is the most ambitious and artistically successful of these three novels, and the only one of them for which I believe a persuasive case could be mounted for its being a masterpiece. I particularly enjoyed the opening section, in which the English countryside is transformed into a scene of dystopia, a trick which is repeated 4 decades later in Rex Warner's excellent The Aerodrome, which I've already reviewed for the channel, and it's from this opening section I wish to quote. Leatherhead is about 12 miles from Maybury Hill. The scent of hay was in the air through the lush meadows beyond Purford, and the hedges on either side were sweet and gay with multitudes of dog roses. The heavy firing that had broken out while we were driving down Maybury Hill ceased as abruptly as it began, leaving the evening very peaceful and still. We got to Leatherhead without misadventure about 9 o'clock, and the horse had an hour's rest while I took supper with my cousins and commended my wife to their care. My wife was curiously silent throughout the drive, and seemed oppressed with forebodings of evil. I talked to her reassuringly, pointing out that the Martians were tied to the pit by sheer heaviness, and at the utmost could but crawl a little out of it, but she answered only in monosyllables. Had it not been for my promise to the innkeeper, she would, I think, have urged me to stay in Leatherhead that night. Would that I had. Her face, I remember, was very white as we parted. Now, I could have chosen more dramatic passages, but what I really like here is the way Wells is developing a sense of how he can work against the conventions of other genres. If you take out the references to the firing of guns and to Martians, this could be taken straight from the pages of a Hardy novel. And I like the way Wells delays these references until the center of the paragraph to maximize this jolting effect on the reader. Okay, so in my view, The War of the Worlds is by far the best of these three novels, and the reason for that is that the sci-fi element is present from the get-go as the cylinders crash to Earth in the first few pages. In the first section, sleepy, rural England is rudely awoken by an invasion from outer space, and then, as the Martians march on London, Wells paints an extremely convincing portrait of the collapse of the social order and millions of people fleeing in panic. One final thing I really approve of is that this novel has no hero. No one steps forward to save humankind, and in fact, it's just the opposite. Without a quirk of fate, the Martians would easily have overrun the planet and annihilated everyone, should they have chosen to do so. Okay, a fantastic read. I hope you'll check out one or all of these excellent novels, but for now, all that remains is for me to thank you for watching and to bid you farewell in the customary fashion. So, until the next time, be safe, be strong, nanu nanu.